I'm Stephanie Lawson. I'm 36, and if you'd met me a month ago, you would have thought I had it all figured out. I had a solid career as a product manager here in Austin, Texas, a 12-year-old son named Josh who is the heartbeat of my world, and a house I worked years to afford. From the outside, it probably looked like stability, maybe even comfort. But that night, when I invited my parents to sit down for what I hoped would be a warm family dinner, everything I thought I knew about where I stood with them shattered in a single sentence. My father leaned across the table, his face red and sharp with anger, and he yelled right into my face that Josh and I were nothing but freeloaders. The words didn't just sting, they burned, and for a moment I thought I'd misheard. But my mother, she didn't stop him, she didn't soften it, she just sat there with that cool little smile of hers, and nodded like he'd said the truest thing in the world. The cruelest part? They were saying this while living under my roof, eating my food, sitting at my table. I can still feel the way my chest tightened, the fork frozen in my hand, the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread suddenly sour in the air. I didn't break down the way they might have expected. I didn't raise my voice or burst into tears. I just looked at both of them as steady as I could, holding my breath so I wouldn't shake. And I said one quiet sentence that froze the room and made even my brother Tony, who had shown up late and smug as ever, lose his grin. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't long, but it was enough to shift something permanent in the air between us. And from that night forward, the ground I thought was already cracked beneath us crumbled completely. I lay awake later asking myself, how did it come to this? How do you reach the point where the people who raised you can dismiss your child, your whole existence, as if you've been nothing but a burden? There's no simple answer, but I know one thing for sure. That kind of fracture doesn't appear overnight. It builds slowly, over years, through choices, betrayals, and silences. And if you've ever sat across a table from someone you love and realized in that instant they've never truly seen you, then you understand the ache that lived in my bones that night. I know some of you listening have been there, maybe not with your parents, but with someone you trusted who turned your worth into a punchline. So let me take you back, because the roots of that dinner table explosion were planted a long time ago. I grew up right here in Austin, in a creaky 2-story house where the floorboards sang under our steps and summer smelled of fresh-cut grass from my dad's mower. I was 18 then, full of restless dreams, when my world tilted. My grandfather had died the year before, and in his will he left me $100,000. For me, it wasn't just money, it was a bridge toward independence, maybe college in computer science, maybe a chance to finally shape a life on my own terms. I remember sitting on my bed with that letter in my lap, imagining myself building something from nothing, feeling this electric hope run through me. But hope, I learned too early, can be stolen. And my parents, well, they had their own plans for that money, plans that had nothing to do with me. It was one of those sticky Texas nights when the air felt too heavy to breathe, when even the ceiling fan did nothing but push warm air around the room. I still remember the sound of cicadas screaming outside as I walked into the living room at my parents' request, not knowing they were about to change the course of my life. My dad, Tom, was sunk deep into his old recliner, arms crossed tight over his chest, his face locked in that stone expression he used whenever he'd already made up his mind. My mom, Carrie, stood near the window with the blinds half drawn, tapping her fingers against the sill like she couldn't quite bring herself to look at me. The whole room smelled faintly of old leather and my father's pipe tobacco, and even before a word was spoken, I felt my stomach knot. They didn't bother with pleasantries. My dad just came out with it, his voice flat, almost casual, like he was talking about the weather. "We need your inheritance." Just like that. No build-up, no apology. For a moment, I actually thought I'd misheard. And then I felt the air leave my chest. I blinked, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Need it for what?" The question sounded smaller than I wanted, like a kid instead of a grown woman on the brink of her future. My mom finally turned toward me then, her eyes carrying that strange mixture of guilt and determination, as if she knew what she was saying was wrong, but had already decided I'd have to carry it anyway. She said the words like they were supposed to make sense, like they were supposed to excite me. Your brother Tony has a chance to make it big. He and your father are starting a construction business, and they need capital to get it off the ground. It's a sure thing, Stephanie. The way she said, sure thing, still echoes in my head, the kind of phrase people use when they're bluffing at a poker table. I wanted to laugh, but instead, I felt my throat tighten. My college acceptance letter was sitting upstairs on my desk, the University of Texas seal shining proudly at the top, and here they were telling me that dream was suddenly negotiable. My dad leaned forward then, the recliner creaking under his weight, and he added, "We'll pay you back." But Tony wasn't even there to look me in the eye, wasn't there to ask me himself. He never was. He was always the golden one, 2 years older, with that charm that seemed to hypnotize them into thinking he'd change the world if they just believed hard enough. I sat there, feeling invisible in my own home, the taste of betrayal sharp as metal on my tongue. They weren't asking me, they were telling me. And in that moment, I realized the money my grandfather left for me, my bridge to a different future, was already slipping away. I always knew I wasn't the favorite, but that night, it hit me like a punch in the gut. I was the afterthought, the one they expected to quietly fall in line, to smile and nod while they built their world around my brother Tony. I remember standing there in the living room with my hands trembling, clutching the acceptance letter from the University of Texas like it was some fragile lifeline. The paper was soft from how many times I'd unfolded it, reread it, imagined myself stepping onto that campus and finally becoming more than the girl no one believed in. My voice cracked when I finally asked, "What about my college?" It felt like the words barely made it out, small and shaky, and I already knew the answer before it left my lips. My father just shrugged like it was no big deal and said, "You can get loans, Stephanie. This is for the family." The word family scraped against me like sandpaper, because in that moment it was clear their family didn't include me. My mother nodded along, her tone sharper than her eyes, insisting Tony's business would set us all up, that I'd see soon enough. I could feel the walls closing in, the room growing smaller, the air thinning like someone had sucked it right out of my lungs. $100,000, a future I'd been planning, dreaming about, gone in the blink of an eye, handed over for a pipe dream, I never even got a say in. They didn't ask, they didn't negotiate, they just took it, wrapped in promises I think even they knew they'd never keep. And of course, the promises never meant a damn thing. Within a year, the so-called construction company collapsed under bad contracts and worse decisions. Tony disappeared from the mess, and my parents never once mentioned paying me back. Not once. It was like my inheritance had never existed, like my future was disposable, like I was disposable. That night, something inside me snapped. I went upstairs, pulled out an old duffel bag, and stuffed it with clothes, my battered laptop, and the $500 I'd scraped together from babysitting the neighbors' kids. My hands shook, my chest ached, but my mind was crystal clear. I didn't slam doors or leave dramatic notes. I just walked out. No one stopped me. No one followed me. No one even called later to see if I was alive. At 18, I found myself standing alone on the curb under a streetlight, with nothing but that bag over my shoulder and this stubborn fire burning inside me. I moved into a cramped apartment near campus with 2 strangers who smelled of takeout and laundry detergent, splitting the rent in a place where the walls were so thin I could hear their arguments through the night. I enrolled in college anyway, but tuition was brutal, and every dollar felt like a mountain I had to climb. Still, I was determined to prove I didn't need them, even if it meant surviving on instant noodles, tutoring high school kids, and collapsing at night on a mattress on the floor. Back then, my life was nothing but survival. I juggled 3 jobs like plates in a circus, waiting tables at a 24-hour diner off I-35 where the smell of fried onions clung to my clothes, stocking shelves at a grocery store where my hands were cracked from cardboard cuts, and tutoring high school kids in math just to scrape together enough for rent and tuition. There were nights I dragged myself home so exhausted I couldn't even lift a fork. Nights I fell asleep still wearing my uniform, the sound of delivery trucks outside rattling the thin windows. My bed was nothing more than a mattress on the floor with mismatched sheets, and some weeks' dinner was a cup of instant noodles and gas station coffee, stretched out just enough to keep me going. Pinned above that mattress was my acceptance letter, taped crooked to the wall like a stubborn reminder of why I was breaking myself in half. Every time I looked at it, I heard my parents' voices in my head, that cold refrain they always used to justify taking everything from me. This is for the family. But it was never for me. Their family had room for Tony's failed schemes, but never for my dreams. That sting, that emptiness, it became my fuel. I'd sit in the library until it closed, surrounded by students who looked well-rested and well-funded, and I would grind through another chapter, another assignment, clinging to the stubborn fire inside me that refused to let them be right about me. My parents called once or twice a year, but the conversations felt like cardboard, stiff, flat, lifeless. My mom would ask, "How's school?" in that distant tone that sounded more like politeness than care, and before I could answer, she'd steer the conversation back to Tony, praising his new project, as though the entire world should orbit around his latest gamble. It was always Tony. Never once did they ask how I managed to keep the lights on, if I had enough to eat, or if I was drowning under loans. I learned to stop expecting anything from them, and with that came a strange kind of freedom, painful but liberating. By the time I reached my senior year, I was bone-tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes every step feel heavier. But I was also unbreakable. I had clawed my way through every setback, every sleepless night, every lecture hall where I fought to keep my eyes open after a double shift. And I did it. I walked across that stage and graduated top of my class with a degree in computer science. When I landed an entry-level job at a tech startup in downtown Austin, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I could breathe. For the first time since walking out of that house, I had proof, not for them, but for myself, that I was more than the girl they discarded. I was building something of my own, brick by brick, and no one could take that away from me. Paying off my student loans was like chipping away at a stone wall with a spoon. It took years of tiny, painful payments, but every cleared balance felt like oxygen filling my lungs. Eventually, I managed to move into a small but decent apartment in Austin. Not fancy, not big, but mine. I remember the sound of the keys jingling in my hand the first night I unlocked the door, the faint smell of fresh paint in the empty rooms, and the thrill of knowing I had carved out a corner of the world that belonged only to me. For the first time, the silence inside those walls felt safe, not lonely. It felt like the start of something real. That's when I met the man who would later become my ex-husband. We were colleagues at the tech firm, bumping into each other over bad office coffee and long project nights. He was sharp, funny in that dry way that sneaks up on you, and he seemed steady, dependable, the kind of man who wouldn't let the ground shift under you. After years of walking alone, I let myself believe in him. We dated, got married, and not long after, I held my son Josh in my arms for the first time. I can still remember the smell of his baby shampoo, the warmth of his little hand curling around my finger. For a moment, I thought I'd finally found stability, that elusive thing I'd been chasing since I was 18, and left my parents' house with nothing but a duffel bag. But life has a way of teaching you the same lesson twice if you didn't learn it the first time. 3 years into the marriage, I picked up his phone one night, and what I saw shattered the picture I'd built in my head. Texts, dozens of them, proof that he'd been cheating for months. The words blurred on the screen as my stomach dropped, and in that moment, I didn't feel rage as much as a cold, familiar recognition. I'd been here before, invisible, betrayed, taken for granted. But this time, I wasn't the 18-year-old girl begging to be seen. I didn't beg him to stay. I packed his bags in silence, set them neatly by the door, and when he walked in, I told him to go. My voice didn't even shake. He left, and just like that, the marriage was over. He didn't disappear completely. To his credit, he stayed in Josh's life, sending support checks and showing up enough to keep the connection alive. And that was enough for me. I wasn't interested in salvaging something broken. Those years hardened me into a woman who doesn't bend, who fights for every scrap of her own success, while the people who should have lifted me up, my parents and my brother Tony, coasted on excuses and entitlement. They never once apologized for stealing my inheritance. They never once acknowledged the nights I went hungry or the jobs I worked until my hands bled. That betrayal planted a seed in me, one that grew quietly, curling tighter with each passing year, waiting for the moment I'd finally face them again. Now, at 36, I can say I've built a life I'm proud of, one they didn't give me, one they can't take from me. My work isn't just a paycheck, it's living proof of every sleepless night I spent hunched over a laptop, every double shift I dragged myself through just to keep my dream alive. I manage a team now, real professionals who build software people actually rely on, and I'm damn good at it. When someone in my industry hears my name, it carries weight, not because I was handed anything, but because I earned it the hard way. That pride isn't flashy, it's quiet, steady, the kind you feel deep in your bones when you know no one can take away what you built with your own 2 hands. I live in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb outside Austin, nothing extravagant, but it's warm and filled with life. The mortgage is mine, paid on time every month, and out back there's a patch of grass where my son Josh sets up his makeshift soccer goals. Sometimes when I stand at the kitchen sink, I watch him run across that yard, his laughter cutting through the Texas heat, and I think, this, right here, is everything I ever fought for. That yard, that laughter, this home, they're ours, built from scratch, no strings attached. Josh is 12 now, and he's the center of my world. He's got this laugh that could soften even the hardest day, the kind that starts in his belly and makes me laugh along even when I don't want to. Whether he's acing his math test or trying to negotiate just one more level on his video game before bed, I see so much of myself in him, the stubborn streak, the quiet determination, the fire to prove himself. Only difference is, I make damn sure he never has to. I remind him every chance I get that he's enough, just as he is, that he doesn't need to earn my love by being perfect or successful. I didn't grow up with that assurance, but he will. Every weekend, we keep a ritual, pizza night, a movie sprawled out on the couch, and those late-night conversations where Josh tells me about his dream of being an astronaut. His eyes light up when he talks about rockets and distant galaxies, and I can't help but believe him. If that boy told me he wanted to build a ladder to the moon, I'd be out there buying wood. I'd move mountains for him, and he knows it. He's my reason for everything, the anchor that steadies me no matter how rough the waves get. And then there are my parents, a whole different story. After I left home at 18, their presence dwindled down to almost nothing. A birthday card once in a while, a short Christmas call, and always with the same undertone. They were more gestures of obligation than genuine love. The few times my parents reached out over the years, it was always the same, short, stiff, hollow exchanges that left me colder than before. But somewhere along the way, their tone shifted. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow creep. My mom, Carrie, started texting with lines that looked like small talk at first. "How's work going, Stephanie?" But I could read between the lines. It was never about me, never about Josh. It was a soft lead-in, the pause before the hook. And sure enough, the next line would slide in like clockwork. "Your father's business isn't doing well." Or, "Tony's trying to start something new. Could you help out?" The first time she asked, I caved. I wired over a couple $1,000s, telling myself it was just a one-off, a chance to finally do the right thing by them, even if they'd never done the same for me. I wanted to believe it might buy me some peace, but the requests kept coming. $5,000 for a car repair that mysteriously cost more than the car itself, $10,000 for a can't-miss business opportunity Tony was cooking up. Each ask felt heavier, more entitled, like they weren't even embarrassed anymore. When I started saying no, the sweetness in her texts vanished, the edges sharpened. "You're doing so well," she'd write. "Can't you spare something for family?" The guilt was baked into every word, like I owed them my success, like all I had was somehow theirs by right. And then one evening, my dad, Tom, called himself. His voice was low and gruff, the way it used to get when I was a kid, and I'd stayed out past curfew. He said, "We sacrificed so much for you, Stephanie." My hand went cold around the phone. Sacrificed? What exactly? The 100,000 they stole from me? The nights I went hungry while they poured everything into Tony's pipe dreams? The years of silence, of birthdays forgotten, and calls left unanswered? If that was sacrifice, it was a version I didn't recognize. I remember sitting on the couch after that call, my phone still glowing in my hand, my chest aching like I'd been punched. Josh was in the other room, laughing at some video game, his voice carrying down the hall, and I thought, that's the only family I need. I'd worked too damn hard to build a life for us, and I wasn't about to let their endless needs swallow me whole again. Eventually, I just stopped answering. My phone would buzz, their names would light up the screen, Mom, Dad, and instead of feeling warmth, I felt my stomach twist. I let the calls slide into voicemail, unread texts piling up like junk mail I couldn't bring myself to open. It wasn't that I didn't know what they wanted. I knew too well. It was never a check-in, never a, "How's Josh doing?" or, "Are you holding up okay?" It was always a new angle, a fresh ask, another chance to bleed me dry. And Tony? My brother never called himself. He didn't have to. My parents did the heavy lifting, speaking for him, begging for him, making his failures sound like opportunities I was too heartless to fund. I knew the pattern by then. Tony chasing another shaky dream, Mom and Dad pitching it to me like investors who'd lost their last prospect. The truth is, it stung, every single time, but I'd taught myself to live with that sting the way you live with an old scar. You stop touching it, even if it aches when the weather changes. What made the difference was the family I chose for myself. I had Josh, my work, and a circle of people who showed up for me in ways blood never had. At the center of that circle was Kimberly Lopez. We'd met 5 years earlier at some bland networking mixer, the kind where everyone pretends to love lukewarm wine and exchange business cards they'll never use. But something about Kimberly stood out. She was direct, sharp, no sugarcoating, no games. Over time, she became more than a colleague or advisor. She became my anchor. Kimberly helped me buy my house, set up a college fund for Josh, even map out a future where money wasn't a constant storm cloud. She was the one I could call when my parents' demands left me doubting myself. I remember one night, sitting at her kitchen island with the smell of coffee between us, my voice breaking as I told her about another text from my mom asking for thousands. She didn't flinch. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "They're using you, Steph. You don't owe them a dime. No hesitation, no pity, just truth." And it stuck. Those words became a wall inside me, one I needed desperately, reinforcing the boundaries I'd only just started to set. For a while, I honestly believed I'd found balance. My work, Josh, the home I built brick by brick. I wasn't chasing closure anymore, and I'd long since stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. All I wanted was to keep moving forward, to protect the little world I'd created where my son could feel safe, where my heart didn't ache every time I heard my family's names. But then came that Tuesday evening, quiet and ordinary at first, the kind that tricks you into thinking life is steady. Josh and I were at the kitchen table, the lamplight warm against his hair as he bent over his math homework, his pencil scratching across the page. The smell of spaghetti still lingered in the air from dinner, and I remember feeling this tiny bubble of peace, until my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw her name, Carrie, my mother. The letters glared back at me like a warning sign. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the last text where she'd asked me for $10,000 for some vague emergency that sounded more like another bailout for Tony. I froze, the phone vibrating in my hand. Every part of me wanted to let it ring out, to send it straight to voicemail like I always did, but something inside me stirred. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe just that old reflex that never dies, the part of you that still wants your mother even when she's done nothing to earn it. Against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. Her voice was different this time, not smooth, not calculated like it always was when she wanted money. It was shaky, jagged, almost desperate. "Stephanie," she said, her words trembling, "it's your father." And in that instant, I knew my life was about to be pulled right back into the storm I'd spent years trying to outrun. "Stephanie, it's your father," my mom's voice cracked through the line, and for a moment I just sat there frozen, the word home still ringing in my head like a slap I hadn't seen coming. Home. That word didn't mean comfort to me. It meant the house I'd walked away from at 18 with a duffel bag and a broken heart, the same place where they stole my inheritance without hesitation. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak, pressing the phone harder to my ear, as if that would steady me. "What's wrong with him?" I asked, my voice thin but controlled, already bracing myself for whatever came next. She hesitated, just long enough for me to feel my pulse pounding in my temples. Then it came. "It's his heart. The doctors say he needs surgery." Her voice was trembling, not in that polished way she usually performed her guilt trips, but rough, frantic, almost out of control. For a split second, something inside me softened. I thought about the man who once jogged behind my bike, steadying me when I wobbled, the man whose laugh used to fill our backyard before the weight of failed dreams turned it sour. That flicker of memory twisted my stomach because I didn't know if I was mourning him already or just mourning who he used to be. But then the words shifted, fast and jumbled, rushing out like she was afraid I'd hang up. "We're in trouble. The bank's threatening to foreclose on the house. $300,000, Steph. Debt from your father's last business venture." Her breath caught like she was choking on the number itself. I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch for a beat, because underneath her panic I heard it, that familiar undertone. Not just fear, but expectation. That old, tired script. "We need you. You can fix this." My heart raced, my hand damp against the phone. It wasn't just about his health, or the house, or the mountain of debt they'd piled up while I was out building my own life from scratch. It was about them pulling me back into the same cycle, wrapping their desperation around my throat like a noose. I heard Josh in the background, humming to himself as he packed up his math homework, and it grounded me, reminded me what mattered. I didn't answer her right away. I just sat there in my kitchen, spaghetti dishes still on the counter, listening to my mother's breath on the other end of the line, and realizing that whatever came next was going to change everything. I leaned back in my chair, the phone still warm in my hand, and glanced over at Josh. He was watching me with those big, curious eyes that see too much even when he doesn't say a word. My chest tightened as I asked, almost against my will, "What do you want me to do about it?" But deep down, I already knew the answer. My mother didn't even pause. "Come back, Stephanie. Talk to the bank, maybe help us out. You're doing so well, and we're family." There it was, that same tired line she'd been feeding me for years. Family. The word felt like a splinter in my skin. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead, my throat closed up. I told her I'd think about it, though my voice sounded flat even to me, and I hung up with my mind spinning. That night, I sat on my couch, the lamp casting shadows across the walls, a glass of wine untouched on the table. I replayed her words over and over. "Your father's sick. The house is at risk. $300,000. The numbers were heavy, but it wasn't just about money. It was about every buried memory I'd tried to lock away, clawing its way back to the surface. Part of me wanted to ignore it all, to let them drown in their own mess the same way they'd let me drown when I was 18, when they took what was mine and left me to fend for myself. Why should I care now, after years of silence and manipulation? But another part of me, the part that still remembered Dad jogging behind my bike as I wobbled on training wheels, the smell of Mom's cookies cooling on the kitchen counter, gnawed at me. I hated that those memories still had power. I hated that even after everything, I still wondered if I'd regret not going back once it was too late. By morning, I couldn't carry the weight alone. I called Kimberly Lopez, the one person who never let me drown in my own guilt. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp and steady like always. When I told her about the call, She didn't hesitate. "Don't let them guilt trip you, Steph. They've been bleeding you dry for years. You don't owe them a damn thing." And she was right. I knew she was right. Kimberly always cut through the noise like a blade. But as I sat there listening to her, staring at Josh's backpack by the door and the sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, I felt something stubborn rising in me. This wasn't about saving them. It was about facing them, once and for all. If my father really was sick, I couldn't live with the what-ifs. So I told her the truth I'd barely admitted to myself. I was going back to Austin. Not for them, but to finally close a chapter I'd left open far too long. That evening, I sat Josh down at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd done his homework just hours earlier. I could feel the weight of what I was about to say pressing on my chest. "I'll be gone for a few days," I told him gently. His pencil rolled out of his hand, and he looked up at me with those wide, searching eyes. "Is Grandpa okay?" he asked, his voice so small it almost broke me. I hated that he even had to ask, hated that this man he barely knew could still cast a shadow over his little heart. My parents had been absent his whole life, choosing silence and excuses over showing up, and now here he was, worried about a grandfather who never once bothered to know him. I brushed his hair back, forcing a calm smile, even as my stomach knotted. "I don't know yet," I said softly. "But I'll be back soon, and when I get home, we'll have pizza night like always, okay?" He nodded, and that quiet, unshaken trust in me was the only thing holding me together. His belief in me was stronger than any doubt I had about myself, and it reminded me why I had to face this mess head on, not for them, but for him and for me. Packing for the trip felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. I hadn't been back to that house in years, not since a tense Christmas visit when Josh was just 5. I can still see him in my memory, tugging at my sleeve in their living room, asking if we could leave because the air was so thick with arguments and cold smiles that even a child could feel it. That memory haunted me as I folded clothes into my suitcase. I kept wondering why I was doing this again, why I was about to walk straight back into a place that never felt like home. I booked the flight, arranged for Josh to stay with our neighbor Mrs. Turner, a retired teacher who adored him like he was her own grandson, and called my boss to take a few days off. But every step, every click, every zipped-up bag made my stomach churn harder. I wasn't just traveling back to a house. I was walking into a battlefield. My mother's call hadn't been about love or worry. It was a demand dressed up as desperation. And I knew, deep down, this trip wasn't going to be about healing, it was going to be about survival. I knew the minute I booked that ticket what was waiting for me. Money, that was always the bottom line with them, more than I could ever imagine, no doubt. And Tony, my brother, I pictured him somewhere in the shadows, smirking, ready to reap the benefits of whatever I gave. As the plane dipped down over Austin, my hometown spread out beneath me in a patchwork of highways and rooftops, and I felt this strange mix of dread and grim resolve settle into my chest. I wasn't coming back as the scared 18-year-old who left with nothing, but that didn't mean the ghosts wouldn't be waiting. I rented a car and drove out to the house I used to call home. The years hadn't been kind to it. The paint peeled in long curling strips, and the once proud lawn was nothing but weeds and patches of brown. It looked smaller than I remembered, like my childhood had stretched its walls wider than reality ever had. When I pulled into the cracked driveway, I sat there for a moment with my hands gripping the wheel, my heart hammering. Then I got out, and before I could knock, the door opened. My mother, Carrie, stood there pale but composed, her voice softer than it had been on the phone. "Thank you for coming," she said, like she was reciting lines from a play. I just nodded, stepping inside, bracing myself for the impact. The smell of the house hit me first. Old coffee, mothballs, and something faintly sour like stale bread. My father, Tom, was in the living room, looking smaller somehow, his body frail, his skin drawn tight. But his eyes, those eyes still had that stubborn glint, the one that said he'd rather break than bend. It was jarring, seeing him both weak and defiant at the same time. And Tony? Nowhere to be found. Typical. He was always absent when accountability was on the line. They didn't waste any time pretending this was a family reunion. Over lukewarm coffee at the kitchen table, my mother laid it out. "The bank's moving fast," she said, her tone sliding from pleading to expectant in the space of a sentence. "You've got the means to step in." I sat there, listening, my face calm, but my mind racing ahead toward the storm I knew was inevitable. And sure enough, the next evening, when I agreed to stay for a family dinner, it all came to a head. The table was set like they were trying to dress the part of a happy family. But the moment I walked in, I felt the trap close around me. What I thought might be a civil meal, maybe a real conversation about my father's health or the looming foreclosure, turned out to be nothing but an ambush. When I walked into the dining room the next evening, I should have trusted the knot in my stomach. The table was set too neatly, candles flickering like they were trying too hard to set a mood. And of course, right on cue, my brother Tony strolled in late, his trademark smirk plastered across his face like he was the guest of honor. My mother, Carrie, lit up the second he walked in, fussing over him, piling food onto his plate before he even sat down. I sat across from them, my body tense, my appetite gone, while my father, Tom, held his place at the head of the table, his expression unreadable but tight with something brewing. The first few minutes were a performance, all smoke and mirrors. Carrie chatted about neighbors I barely remembered, her voice unnaturally bright, like she was trying to wallpaper over the cracks in the room. Tony launched into a monologue about his latest project, some vague real estate scheme that sounded just as shaky as his construction company had years ago. I nodded politely, pushing food around my plate, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My skin prickled with anticipation, the air so heavy I could almost taste it. And then it came. My father broke the silence, his voice low and deliberate, like a judge handing down a sentence. "Stephanie, we need to talk about the house." He leaned forward, eyes locked on mine, and the table seemed to shrink between us. "The bank's not budging. We owe $300,000, and they're ready to take it all." I set my fork down, my hands steady even though my pulse was racing. "I know," I said carefully. "You told me yesterday. So what's the plan?" That's when my mother jumped in, her tone sharp enough to slice through the air. "The plan is you, Stephanie. You're doing well, aren't you? Making $350,000 a year? You could cover at least $200,000. It's the least you can do for family." Her words hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. Not a loan, not even a request. Just a demand, laid bare on the table, as if the years I'd fought and clawed for my career, every sacrifice, every late night, every step forward, was theirs to claim. Like my success was simply community property. Like my worth existed only in what I could hand over. I drew in a long, slow breath, trying to steady the shake in my chest before I spoke. "That's a lot of money," I said carefully, my voice low, almost too calm for what I was feeling inside. "I have my own responsibilities. My son, my house, my future. Why is this on me?" My words barely hit the air before my father's face hardened, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You've always been selfish," he snapped, his voice rising like a whip across the table. "We raised you, gave you everything, and now you're hoarding your money while we lose our home." I stared at him, stunned. Gave me everything? The words rattled around in my skull, absurd and cruel. This was the man who took the inheritance my grandfather left me, who watched me walk out at 18 with nothing but a duffel bag, who never once asked if I had enough to eat. And now I was the selfish one? My fork slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the plate, the sound sharp and ugly in the silence that followed. That's when Tony chimed in, leaning back in his chair, his smirk widening like he'd been waiting for his chance to pounce. His voice dripped with condescension, every word soaked in entitlement. "Come on, Steph, don't play the victim. You're sitting pretty while we're drowning. Step up. Do the right thing for once." His eyes flicked at me like a challenge, like he expected me to crumble under the weight of his smugness the way I always had as a kid. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms, heat rising through my body until I thought I might explode. My blood boiled, not just from their demands, but from what they weren't saying, what they never said. Not once had they asked about Josh, who was back home safe with Mrs. Turner, our neighbor who cared for him more in a weekend than my parents had in 12 years. They didn't care about my life, about the battles I fought alone, about the son who depended on me for everything. To them, I was still nothing but a resource to be drained, a bank account with a pulse. And for the first time that night, I felt something inside me shift. All my life it had been about what I could give them. My money, my time, my silence, while they took and took, never once looking back to see what it cost me. I opened my mouth to respond, but my mother leaned forward first, her hands folded neatly on the table, a smile curling at the edges of her lips. It wasn't warm, it was sharp and calculated, the kind of smile that hides poison behind its teeth. And then she said it, her voice slicing through the air like glass breaking. You and your son are just freeloaders, living off our sacrifices, acting like you're better than us. The word freeloaders lodged itself in my chest like a blade, but it was the mention of Josh that shattered me. My son, the boy who had never asked for a thing beyond my love, who laughed at pizza nights and dreamed of rocket ships, reduced to a weapon in her mouth. Something in me snapped so cleanly, it almost felt like relief. My chair scraped back across the floor as I stood, my body trembling, but my voice came out low, firm, and unshaken. Don't you dare bring my son into this. I locked eyes with her, refusing to flinch. You've got no right to talk about him, or me, that way. My father scoffed, his face flushing red as he slammed a hand against the table. Show some respect, Stephanie. We're your parents. The irony was almost laughable. Respect? From the same people who stole my future, who ignored my hunger, who now had the audacity to insult the one person who gave my life meaning. My chest burned with a fury I hadn't let myself feel in years, a fire that was no longer about proving myself to them, but about protecting Josh from ever being touched by their poison. The room hung heavy in silence after that, their eyes locked on me, their mouths set in lines of contempt. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small under their gaze. I felt taller, stronger, and I knew, in that moment, that whatever came next, I wasn't going to bend. Not for them, not anymore. Respect. The word rattled in my chest like a cruel joke. Respect from the very people who had stripped me bare, stolen my future, and then dared to call me selfish. My eyes burned as I turned toward Tony, locking onto him like a target. And you, I said, my voice sharp as a blade. You've coasted your entire life on their excuses, letting them beg and scrape for you while you hide behind their backs. Don't you dare tell me how to live. For the first time all evening, his smirk faltered, his mouth opening like he had a retort, but nothing came. He just sat there, his silence louder than anything he could have said. My mother's voice cut through the thick air, high and shrill, trying to reclaim control. Stephanie, you owe us. We're family. The words snapped whatever fragile patience I had left. I leaned forward, my voice steady but filled with fire. Family doesn't demand what I've earned. Family doesn't steal from me and call it sacrifice. And family sure as hell doesn't insult my son. You want to call us freeloaders? Fine, but I'm done. The table seemed to tremble under the weight of those words, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked from Tom's hardened stare to Carrie's tight, bitter smile, then to Tony's vacant eyes, and I knew. I was done being their scapegoat, their wallet, their silent punching bag. I'm through letting you walk over me, I said slowly, deliberately, like each word was a stone I was laying into place, building a wall they'd never climb again. From here on out, I'll take charge, for me and for Josh. Not for you. My chest burned, but the heat wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. My mother laughed then, low and bitter, her tone dripping with scorn. Take charge? You've always been a dreamer, Stephanie. You'll never outdo us. I held her gaze, unflinching, my voice calm in a way that unnerved even me. Keep talking, I said. You'll see. For the first time in years, I wasn't the girl at their mercy. I was the woman who'd survived them, and I wasn't backing down. The room went dead quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Their faces were carved in a mix of shock and contempt, like I had betrayed them by finally standing my ground. My father broke first, his palm slamming against the table so hard the dishes rattled. His voice dropped into a growl. "You think you're better than us? You're nothing without this family." But I didn't flinch. Not this time. I'd spent nearly 2 decades clawing my way into a life that was mine alone, built on sacrifice and grit, not handouts and manipulation. Their words couldn't touch me anymore. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the floor, and walked out of that dining room. My hands were steady, though my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. Back in the guest room, I dialed Kimberly Lopez. Her voice came through clear, sharp, a lifeline when I needed it most. "You're really done with them?" she asked, and I could hear both worry and pride threaded into her tone. I pressed my forehead into my hand and whispered the truth. I have to be. For Josh. For me, Kimberly didn't argue. She just said she'd stand with me, whatever came next, and I knew the fight was far from over. For a brief moment, I thought the storm had passed, that the worst was behind me, but I underestimated just how far my mother would go. 2 days later, my phone lit up in a frenzy. Notifications stacked one after another, texts from friends, colleagues, even Josh's soccer coach. "Have you seen this?" they asked. My stomach dropped as I clicked the link, and suddenly, there it was. On TikTok, my mother's face filled the screen, streaked with tears that looked a little too rehearsed, her voice trembling in a way I'd never once heard in real life. She clutched a tissue like a prop, staring straight into the camera. "My daughter abandoned us," she cried. "She's got all this money, but she won't help her own family save our home. She's turned her back on us, on her own blood." Below the video, a caption blared. "Ungrateful daughter leaves parents to lose everything." It had already racked up thousands of views, hundreds of comments rolling in, strangers calling me heartless, selfish, a disgrace. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the words, feeling the burn of betrayal spread deeper than I thought it could. They hadn't just tried to break me in private anymore. They'd dragged me into the public square. My stomach twisted into knots as I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the glow of my phone screen burning into my eyes. Carrie had crossed a line I didn't even know she was willing to cross. She'd taken our private war and dragged it out into the public square, twisting every truth until I looked like the villain in a story she had choreographed. My hands shook with anger, not just at her lies, but at the way she'd slipped Josh into her performance, implying that my son, my innocent 12-year-old boy, was part of this so-called betrayal. That cut deeper than anything. Every cell in me wanted to fire back. I imagined posting my own video, telling the world about the inheritance they stole, about the years they ignored me, about the dinner where they called Josh and me freeloaders. I pictured myself tearing down their lies one sentence at a time, but even in my fury, I knew better. Reacting in anger would only give them what they wanted, another scene to twist, another chance to play the victims. If I was going to respond, it had to be smarter, sharper, something that ended this cycle once and for all. I called Kimberly Lopez, my advisor, my friend, the one voice I trusted when mine was cracking. She picked up before the first ring ended. "I saw the video," she said, her voice flat with disgust. "It's vile, Steph. What do you want to do?" I was pacing the room, my bare feet pressing into the carpet, the rage inside me suddenly hardening into something steadier. "I want to take control," I told her, my voice calm even though my pulse was racing. "They are not going to bully me into submission. Not this time." Kimberly didn't hesitate. "Then hit them where it hurts. The house. That's what they're clinging to. You've got the means. Buy it out from under them." Her words landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting something inside me. I didn't even know I'd been holding back. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what they had tried to strip from me years ago. My power, my dignity, my choice. And for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than anger. I felt clarity. The moment I hung up with Kimberly, I knew there was no turning back. She promised to connect me with a lawyer by morning, and true to her word, the next day I was sitting across from Brenda Martinez, a real estate attorney with sharp eyes and a sharper tone. She didn't waste time sugarcoating. "The bank is ready to foreclose," she explained, sliding a folder toward me. "Your parents have defaulted on a $300,000 loan, but there's a way. You can purchase the property directly from the bank, wipe out their claim completely." She leaned back, her expression serious. "It's not cheap, but your finances can handle it. And if you do this, you'll own the house outright. They'll have no leverage left." I sat there for a long moment, running my fingers over the cool edge of the table. This wasn't about rescuing them. It wasn't even about the house. It was about finally cutting the strings that had bound me since I was 18, strings they kept yanking every time I tried to move forward. I nodded slowly, feeling my resolve lock into place. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady. Kimberly worked her magic the way she always did, pulling together my savings, some investments, and a manageable loan. Within a week, the deal was done. I remember sitting in that sterile bank office, pen in hand, signing paper after paper until my wrist ached. When it was over, the banker slid the final document toward me with a congratulatory smile. My name, Stephanie Lawson, printed in bold as the legal owner of the house I'd grown up in. It felt surreal, like I'd just stitched closed a wound that had been bleeding for half my life. But I wasn't finished. Brenda drafted a contract with terms my parents couldn't ignore. They could stay in the house, yes, but only if they agreed to repay the $300,000 over 5 years, with interest. If they missed a payment, they'd be out. It wasn't cruelty. It was accountability, something they'd never once lived under. And I wanted the message to land with weight. So instead of delivering it myself, I had Brenda send the official notice directly to them, and to Tony. The document spelled it out clearly. I was now their landlord, and they were tenants bound by my terms. Along with it, Brenda included a cease and desist letter demanding Carrie take down the TikTok video and stop spreading lies about me and Josh. For the first time, I didn't just feel like I was defending myself. I felt like I was in control. Defamation has consequences. That's how Brenda phrased it in the letter. Every word crisp, unyielding, impossible to twist. I knew the second my mother read it, she'd see it as a slap in the face. But I didn't care anymore. She'd crossed a line, dragging Josh and me through the mud for strangers on the internet, and I was done playing nice. When the notice landed in their mailbox, it didn't take long for my phone to light up. Her voice exploded through the speaker before I even said hello, shrill with fury. "You think you can control us, Stephanie?" She spat, the venom thick. "You're no better than us, throwing your money around like you're some big shot." I let her rant, her words tumbling over themselves, feeding on their own poison. My silence pressed back harder than shouting ever could. Finally, I cut in, my tone steady. "You got the notice. Follow it, or face the consequences." And with that, I hung up. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears, but my conscience felt clean for the first time in years. Later that night, Tony finally broke his silence with a single text. "You're ruthless." I stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone face down without replying. He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't sorry either. Ruthless was survival. Ruthless was the woman they had created when they stripped me of my inheritance and left me to fend for myself. If that was the name they wanted to give me now, I'd wear it. That weekend, I flew back to Austin and picked Josh up from Mrs. Turner's house. The second he saw me, he sprinted across the yard, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his smile brighter than the Texas sun. "Did you fix everything?" he asked, his voice so full of trust it made my throat tighten. I hugged him close, burying my face in his hair, breathing in the warm scent of grass and soap. "I'm working on it, kid," I whispered. I didn't tell him about the house, or the video, or the battle still raging in the background. He didn't need that weight on his shoulders. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. My mother's silence after that last call didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. And as I sat with Kimberly that evening, going over the paperwork, I realized I'd have to be ready for her next move. "You're playing a dangerous game," Kimberly said one evening as we spread the paperwork across her kitchen counter. Her voice carried that mix of warning and admiration only she could pull off. "They're not going to take this lying down." I nodded, staring at the contract in my hands, the weight of it pressing against my palms. I had finally taken a stand, and for the first time, I wasn't shaking. I was ready for whatever came next. My mother's silence didn't last long. A week after Brenda sent the legal notice, my phone lit up with a call from her office. "They're refusing to sign," Brenda told me, her tone calm but firm, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd seen this dance 100 times. "Your parents insist they don't owe you anything and are demanding to stay in the house." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Of course they were. Carrie and Tom had spent their entire lives twisting accountability into something optional, rewriting the story until they always came out the victims. But this time, the story wasn't theirs to write. Because the house was mine now. Every square foot of chipped paint, every creaky stair, every memory embedded in those walls, it all had my name on the deed. Their refusal didn't weaken me. It sealed their fate. "Move forward with eviction proceedings," I told Brenda, my voice steady, unshaken. "No more chances." They made their choice, and saying those words out loud felt like closing a door that had been left cracked open for too many years. The process wasn't quick, but it was thorough. Brenda filed the paperwork, and soon a court date was set. My parents didn't roll over quietly. They fought back the only way they knew how, through manipulation and guilt. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my mother, each one sharper than the last. "You're tearing this family apart. How can you do this to your own blood?" The words stung, I won't lie, but they didn't sway me. Not anymore. This was the same woman who had called my son a freeloader, who smeared me on TikTok for strangers to consume like gossip, who expected me to bankroll their mistakes while pretending they'd ever sacrificed for me. Her blood might run in my veins, but it wasn't family, not the way I defined it now. Tom's messages came colder than Carrie's, stripped of guilt and dripping instead with menace. "You'll regret this, Stephanie." The words were short, sharp, designed to rattle me, but instead of deleting them, I saved every single one, every voicemail, every text. I handed them all over to Brenda, each message a brick in the wall of evidence that showed exactly who they were when no one else was looking. Tony stayed quiet, at least where I could hear him, but I knew better than to think he wasn't involved. He'd always been the ghostwriter of their excuses, the golden child lurking in the shadows while they carried his water. When Brenda served the eviction notice in person, she told me Tony was there. His face had gone pale, but his mouth stayed clamped shut. He didn't dare confront me, not after the dinner where I'd stripped away his armor in front of them all. The notice gave them 30 days to vacate. If they didn't, the sheriff would make sure they did. I didn't want it to come to that, but I was ready. I had spent too many years bending under their weight. This time, I would not bend. By the end of the month, they were gone. No apology, no acknowledgement, no attempt at reconciliation. Just absence. Brenda confirmed it with a quiet phone call, her tone professional but tinged with relief. They'd left the house in chaos, boxes half-packed, furniture shoved awkwardly against walls, as if they'd stormed out mid-argument. It was petty, but it also meant they were finally out of my space, my life. When I flew back to Austin to see the property for myself, walking through those rooms felt like stepping into a ghost story. Every corner was thick with memories I'd tried to bury. The kitchen, once filled with the smell of Carrie's cookies cooling on the counter, now reeked of stale food and was cluttered with unwashed dishes. My old bedroom, the one where I taped my acceptance letter to the wall and dreamed of a life beyond their reach, had been reduced to storage, stacked high with the remnants of Tony's failed ventures. Boxes labeled with businesses that never got off the ground, collecting dust where my hope once lived. I didn't linger. I walked through each room with steady steps, acknowledging what had been and then letting it go. I didn't want to walk back into that house again, not even to repaint the walls, so I hired a cleaning crew and listed it for rent. The income would more than cover the loan I'd taken to buy it, and whatever was left would go straight into Josh's college fund. That was the kind of legacy I wanted to build. Not a string of broken promises, but a future my son could count on. Word got back to me through a mutual acquaintance about my parents. Carrie had picked up a part-time job at a grocery store, and Tom was doing bookkeeping for a small business in town. His health was still fragile, but he was managing. For the first time in years, they were being forced to stand on their own 2 feet. And Tony? He'd slunk right back into their orbit, moving into that cramped apartment with them, still spinning his next big idea out of thin air. I didn't care for the details anymore. Their lives weren't my responsibility. Not anymore. Cutting them off was harder than I'd expected. Not because I still craved their approval. I'd buried that need long ago, but because letting go meant finally accepting that the door I'd always secretly hoped might open to something better was closed for good. I blocked their numbers, deleted every voicemail without listening, and unfollowed Carrie's TikTok account. The video was gone after Brenda's cease and desist letter, but the sting of those comments lingered. Strangers calling me cruel, heartless, a bad daughter, never knowing the decades of betrayal behind the headlines. I had to remind myself, sometimes out loud, that their opinions didn't matter. I knew my truth, and that was enough. When I got back home, Josh was waiting for me in the living room, his face lit up with pride. He held out a drawing, a rocket ship soaring past the moon, his dream of being an astronaut sketched into every crooked line. "For you, Mom," he said, grinning wide. I hugged him so tight my heart felt like it might burst. Every choice I'd made, the house, the fight, the eviction, it was all for him, to show him that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. That weekend, we finally planted flowers in the backyard, something we'd been talking about for months. Kneeling side by side in the dirt, our hands muddy, he looked up at me and asked quietly, "What about Grandma and Grandpa? Are they mad at us?" Josh asked one afternoon, his voice small, almost uncertain, as he patted soil around the flowers we'd just planted. The question hung in the air heavier than the Texas heat. I paused, my hands still in the dirt, choosing my words carefully. "They're mad at themselves," I said finally, brushing the hair from his forehead. "But we're okay, you and me. We've got each other." He nodded at that, satisfied, and went back to planting as if the world had just been set right again. And in that moment, his quiet trust felt worth more than any apology I knew I'd never receive. Kimberly stayed by my side through it all, checking in the way only she could, with blunt honesty wrapped in loyalty. One evening over coffee, she looked me square in the eye and said, "You're free now, Steph. They can't touch you anymore." And she was right, but freedom wasn't weightless. It came with a strange heaviness, too. I had spent so many years defining myself in opposition to them, their failures, their demands, their betrayals, that I had to ask myself who I was when the fight was finally over. I decided to find out. I threw myself into work, not out of desperation this time, but out of choice. I took on new projects that scared me, mentored younger colleagues who reminded me of myself at 22, hungry and unsure. I wanted Josh to see a mother who wasn't just surviving anymore, but thriving, building something bigger than pain. At night, when he spread his drawings across the table, rockets, planets, whole galaxies sketched in pencil, I told him the same thing over and over. You can go anywhere, be anything. And for the first time, I believed it not just for him, but for me too. At the office, people noticed the change before I even did. My focus was sharper, my voice more certain in meetings, my presence different. I wasn't just Stephanie Lawson, product manager anymore. I was a woman who had clawed back her own life, who had faced the people who tried to break her and walked away unbent. And standing there in that truth, I realized something. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about release. And sometimes, the sweetest victory isn't proving them wrong. It's finally being free enough that you don't have to. Every so often, during those long months of legal battles and rebuilding, I found my thoughts drifting back to Travis, my ex-husband. He'd stayed clear of the drama, true to his quiet, hands-off nature. When he called to check in on Josh, our conversations were civil, almost routine, but one evening, his voice softened in a way that caught me off guard. "You're doing good, Steph," he said, and though I didn't need his validation, it landed like a small acknowledgement of how far I'd come. Josh deserved a father who at least showed up in his own way, even if it was just through phone calls and birthday cards, and I made sure those lines stayed open, for Josh, not for me. Looking back, I realized the lesson had never really been about winning or losing. It wasn't about the house, or the money, or even the years of betrayal I'd carried like scars. It was about respect, something my parents never gave me and maybe never even understood. Because family isn't just blood, it's the people who truly see you, who stand beside you, who lift you up as fiercely as you lift them. My parents and Tony had chosen themselves every single time. I chose differently. I chose Josh and Kimberly, and the life I built with my own hands from nothing but determination and spite, turned into strength. That's what family means to me now, not obligation, not guilt, but love and loyalty that run deeper than genetics. Sometimes, when I happen to drive past the old house, I glance over at it. It's just another rental now, home to a young couple with kids whose bikes are scattered across the lawn. I don't feel anger when I see it anymore, just distance. It's a house, not my home, and it never will be again. My home is where Josh's laughter bounces off the walls, where pizza nights and dreams of rocket ships fill the air with warmth I never knew growing up. I don't know if my parents ever learned their lesson, and truthfully, I don't need to. I have my son. I have my work. I have my peace. And for the first time in my life, that is more than enough. And if you've stayed with me through this story, I'd really love to hear what you think. Have you ever had to stand up to family or cut ties to protect your peace? Share your thoughts down in the comments. Your story might be the one that helps somebody else feel less alone. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really does mean so much. It's how we keep sharing these real, messy, powerful stories together.